I came home early to surprise my husband on his 65th birthday. I wanted to see his face light up when I walked through the door. Instead, I found him on the balcony, crying like I'd never seen him cry before. My husband, the man who raised 3 kids, who buried both his parents without shedding a tear, who worked 40 years without complaining once, was sobbing in the darkness of our own home. And inside? Inside our living room, my son was laughing, pouring champagne, toasting with her family like it was some kind of celebration. His father was falling apart 10 feet away, and my son didn't even notice. Or worse, he didn't care. I stood there in the doorway, still holding the birthday cake I'd bought. They didn't see me, but I saw everything. And in that moment, without hearing a single word, I understood exactly what my son had done to us, what he'd been doing for months while I was too blind to see it. The next morning, they woke up to find their entire world had vanished. But let me start from the beginning. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this story is going to make you question everything about family. Subscribe, because what comes next, nobody saw coming. My name is Dorothy. I'm 72 years old, and I've been married to Frank for 43 years. We built a good life together. A simple life, but honest. We raised our son Michael in a 3-bedroom house in Ohio, the same house where I'm sitting right now, telling you this story. Frank worked construction his whole life. I was a school secretary until I retired 5 years ago. We never had much money, but we had enough. We had love. We had respect. Or so I thought. Michael is our only child. We tried for years to have more kids, but it never happened. So Michael became everything to us. Maybe that was our first mistake. We spoiled him, gave him everything we never had. Frank worked double shifts so Michael could go to college. I took a second job at the grocery store on weekends so he could have a car. We sacrificed everything for our boy. And he graduated, got a good job at an accounting firm, made us proud. Then he met Sandra. Sandra came from money. Her father owned 3 car dealerships. Her mother never worked a day in her life. The first time Michael brought her to our house, I saw the way she looked at our furniture, the way she touched things like they might be dirty. Frank saw it too, but he said nothing. He never wanted to cause problems. That was Frank. Always keeping the peace, even when peace wasn't what we needed. Sandra smiled at us, said all the right things, but her eyes told a different story. They got married 2 years later. Big wedding. Sandra's family paid for everything, which was good because we couldn't have afforded it. 300 guests, open bar, a band that played until midnight. Frank and I sat at a table in the back, surrounded by Sandra's relatives who barely spoke to us. Michael gave a speech thanking his new in-laws for making this dream come true. He mentioned us once. Just once. And thanks to my parents for, being there. That's when Frank squeezed my hand under the table. His jaw was tight. But he smiled through it all. After the wedding, things changed fast. Michael stopped coming over for Sunday dinners. He'd call with excuses. They were busy. Sandra had plans with her family. They were going on another trip. Frank would hang up the phone and stare at the wall. I'd make excuses for Michael. He's building his own life, Frank. That's what kids do. But I didn't believe it either. A son doesn't forget his father's birthday. A son doesn't ignore his mother's calls. Unless someone's teaching him to. Sandra got pregnant 8 months after the wedding. Frank cried when Michael told us. Happy tears. He thought a grandchild would bring us all closer. I wanted to believe it too. But when little Emma was born, we weren't allowed in the delivery room. Sandra's parents were there, her sister, her cousins. We waited in the parking lot for 4 hours until Michael finally came out and showed us a photo on his phone. Sorry, guys. Sandra only wanted her family there. Hospital rules. Hospital rules. That's what he said. We tried to visit Emma every week, but there was always a reason we couldn't come over. Sandra's mother was already there. The baby had a cold. They were renovating. Frank started keeping track in a little notebook. 3 visits in 2 months. Then 2 visits. Then 1. I found him sitting at the kitchen table one night, reading that notebook with tears running down his face. I don't understand, Dorothy. What did we do wrong? I had no answer. All I knew was that our son was slipping away, and we were powerless to stop it. Then came the phone call that started everything. It was a Tuesday morning, about 6 months ago. Michael called and asked if he and Sandra could come over that evening. They needed to talk to us about something important. My stomach dropped. Frank's face went white. In our minds, "we need to talk," only meant one thing. Something was terribly wrong. We spent the whole day terrified. Was someone sick? Were they getting divorced? Was Emma okay? By the time they arrived, I'd nearly made myself sick with worry. They sat on our couch, the same couch Frank and I bought 30 years ago from a second-hand store. Sandra looked at it like she was afraid it might stain her designer jeans. Michael cleared his throat 3 times before he finally spoke. "Mom, Dad, Sandra and I have been talking. We want to move her parents in with us. They're getting older and Sandra wants them close by." I looked at Frank. He was nodding slowly, not understanding yet what was coming. That's nice, son. Family should stay close." Michael shifted in his seat. "The thing is, we need a bigger house." Sandra jumped in before Michael could continue. Her voice was sugar-sweet, but her eyes were cold. "We found the perfect property. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, huge backyard for Emma. It's in Maple Ridge." Maple Ridge was the wealthiest neighborhood in town. Houses there started at $500,000. Frank's hands gripped the armrests of his chair. That's wonderful. We're happy for you." But Sandra wasn't done. "We're a bit short on the down payment. We were hoping you could help us out. Just a loan. We'll pay you back." The number she said made my heart stop. $80,000. They wanted $80,000 from us. Frank's face turned gray. That was nearly everything we had saved. Our retirement fund. The money we'd put aside for emergencies, for medical bills, for the uncertain future that comes with getting old. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Michael was staring at his shoes, unable to look at us. "We wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," Sandra continued. "But my parents are moving in, and they're selling their house to help too. Everyone's contributing. We thought you'd want to be part of this." Frank finally found his voice. "Son, that's all the money we have." Michael looked up then, and for a second, I saw the boy I'd raised. The boy who used to climb into bed with us during thunderstorms. But then Sandra put her hand on his knee, and his expression hardened. "Dad, you and Mom don't need that much money. You own this house outright. You have pensions. We're the ones with a mortgage and a kid and another one on the way. Another baby." They were having another baby, and they'd told Sandra's parents first. I could see it in the way Sandra's hand moved to her stomach. She'd already told them. We were the last to know. Frank stood up slowly. I'd seen him move like that only a few times in our marriage, when he was trying very hard not to explode. "Michael, your mother and I, we've given you everything. We put you through college. We helped with the wedding. We bought Emma's crib and stroller. We've never said no to you." His voice cracked. "But this is asking us to give up our security. What happens if I get sick? What happens if your mother needs care?" Michael's jaw tightened. "I knew you'd say no. Sandra said you would. She said you'd choose yourselves over your own grandchildren." The words hung in the air like poison. Frank's face crumbled. I watched 43 years of being a good father crack right down the middle. "We're not choosing ourselves, son. We can't give you everything we have. That's not fair." Sandra stood up, grabbing her purse. "Let's go, Michael. We shouldn't have come. My parents were right. Some people just can't understand what it means to put family first." She walked to the door without looking back. Michael followed her, but he stopped in the doorway. "I'm disappointed, Dad. I really thought you'd come through for us." The door closed. Frank stood there, shaking. I wanted to run after them, to explain, to apologize for what? For not bankrupting ourselves? For having boundaries? But I couldn't move. I just watched Frank sink back into his chair and put his face in his hands. "Dorothy," he whispered, "did I just lose my son over money?" I told him no. I told him Michael would understand once he calmed down. I told him everything I needed to hear myself, but deep down, I knew something had broken that couldn't be fixed with words. The next 3 months were torture. Michael stopped calling entirely. We'd drive by their house sometimes just to see if they were home. Once I saw Sandra's parents' car in the driveway, a brand new Mercedes. They'd bought their down payment house somehow, without our money, which meant they never really needed us. They just wanted us to prove we'd sacrifice everything for them. And when we couldn't, we became disposable. Frank started having nightmares. He'd wake up gasping, and when I'd ask what he dreamed, he'd just shake his head. But I knew. He was dreaming about losing Michael forever. I tried calling Michael at work. His secretary said he was in meetings. I tried his cell phone, straight to voicemail. I sent cards for Emma's birthday. They came back unopened. Frank wanted to drive to their house and demand to see our grandchildren. But I stopped him. If we push, we'll push them away forever, I said. So we waited, and waited. And the silence grew louder every day. Our house felt empty even though both of us were there. We'd sit at dinner, barely eating, both thinking about the same thing, but too afraid to say it out loud. We'd lost our son. Then Frank's birthday came, June 15th. He turned 65. I asked him what he wanted to do, and he said, "Nothing. I don't want a party. I don't want to celebrate." But I couldn't let it pass without doing something. So I planned a small surprise. I'd go to the bakery that morning, get his favorite chocolate cake, pick up a bottle of wine, come home early from my volunteer work at the library. Maybe we'd sit on the balcony like we used to, watch the sunset, and remind ourselves that we still had each other even if we'd lost Michael. That morning, I kissed Frank goodbye before he left for his part-time job at the hardware store. He still worked 3 days a week, not because we needed the money, but because he needed something to do. "Happy birthday, honey," I said. He gave me a sad smile. "Thanks, Dorothy. Same as every other day now." I wanted to tell him about my plan, but I kept it secret. A surprise. Something to make him smile. I had no idea that by the end of the day I'd be the one surprised. And not in any way I could have imagined. I left for the library at 9. I'd signed up to help with the children's reading program on Friday mornings. Usually I stayed until 2, but today I told them I had to leave early. "Family thing," I said. They smiled and wished me well. I picked up the cake at the bakery, German chocolate, his favorite since he was a boy. Then the wine. Then I drove home, rehearsing what I'd say. Maybe we'd call Michael together. Maybe we'd try one more time to rebuild what was broken. Maybe on his father's birthday, our son would finally answer the phone. I pulled into our driveway at 1:30. Michael's car was there. My heart leapt. He'd remembered. He'd come to see his father on his birthday. Maybe Sandra had convinced him to reconcile. Maybe this was the beginning of healing. I grabbed the cake and wine from the passenger seat and hurried to the door. It was unlocked. I heard voices inside. Laughter, music playing softly. For a moment, I felt pure joy. Michael had come home. Frank wasn't alone on his birthday. Everything was going to be okay. But then I stepped inside, and that's when everything shattered. What I saw in the next 30 seconds would change everything. But before I tell you, I need to know, are you still with me? Drop a comment below. Because what happens next, it's going to make you understand why I did what I did the very next morning. I stood in the doorway, holding that birthday cake, and the scene in front of me made no sense at first. Michael was in our living room. Sandra was there. Her parents, Richard and Patricia, were sitting in Frank's favorite chair and on our couch. Sandra's sister was there too, and her husband. They had champagne glasses. They were laughing. There were papers spread out on our coffee table. And in the middle of it all, a sold sign leaning against the wall. Our furniture was already tagged with yellow stickers. My brain couldn't process it fast enough. I looked through the sliding glass door to the balcony. That's where I saw Frank. He was sitting on the chair he'd built himself 20 years ago, his shoulders shaking. He had his face in his hands. No one inside was looking at him. They were toasting, celebrating. I heard Sandra's father say, "To new beginnings. Finally, a house worthy of our family." And Michael clinked his glass with theirs. My son, toasting with them while his father fell apart 10 feet away. I must have made a sound, a gasp maybe, or the cake box hitting the floor, because suddenly everyone turned to look at me. The room went silent. Michael's face went white. Sandra's expression shifted from joy to something cold and calculating in a split second. Her mother stood up, smoothing her dress like I'd interrupted something important. "Oh, Dorothy, you're home early." Her voice was ice. I couldn't speak. I just stared at my son, waiting for an explanation that made sense. But he couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom." Michael finally found his voice. "We were going to call you. We can explain." But before he could continue, Frank appeared in the doorway from the balcony. His eyes were red and swollen. His face was wet with tears. He looked at me, and in that look I saw everything: betrayal, heartbreak, and a brokenness so complete that I felt my own heart crack in response. "Dorothy," he said quietly, "they sold our house." The words didn't compute. "What?" I looked back at Michael. "Tell me he's wrong. Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Sandra stood up, and that's when I saw it clearly. She was very pregnant, at least 7 months. They'd hidden this from us, too. "Dorothy, let's all calm down and discuss this like adults." Her voice had that condescending tone I'd come to hate. "Michael has been handling your finances since Frank had that dizzy spell last month. You both signed power of attorney papers, remember? He's been protecting your interests." "Power of attorney?" I looked at Frank. His face told me he remembered the same thing I did. Michael had brought papers by one evening, said they were just-in-case forms, health directive stuff. We'd signed them because we trusted our son. "You sold our house?" My voice came out as a whisper. "You sold our house without telling us?" Michael finally looked at me. "Mom, Dad, please, you're getting older. This house is too big for you. The stairs, the maintenance, the property taxes. It's too much. Sandra and I found you a beautiful apartment at Riverside Senior Living. It's 1 bedroom, but it's perfect for you. Everything on 1 floor. Activities. Medical staff on site. You'll love it. Senior living. They'd put us in a senior living facility. Without asking. Without discussing. They'd stolen our home." Frank moved past me into the living room. His hands were trembling. "When?" he asked. "When did you do this?" Richard, Sandra's father, cleared his throat. He was a big man, used to getting his way. "The sale finalized yesterday. The new owners take possession in 30 days. We got a very good price, $350,000. After the agent fees and closing costs, there's about $300,000 left. That's being split appropriately." "Split?" I watched Frank's face go from confusion to horror. "Split? This is our house, our money." Sandra's mother, Patricia, laughed. Actually, laughed. "Well, technically Michael is the one who facilitated the sale. And given everything you owe him for college, for the wedding help, for all the years he supported you emotionally, we thought it was only fair that he receive the majority. He's taking $200,000 for the down payment on his new home. You're getting $100,000, which is more than enough for 2 old people." She said old people like we were already dead, like we were luggage they were trying to redistribute. Frank lunged toward Richard, but Michael stepped between them. "Dad, don't." His voice was firm, like he was talking to a child. "This is what's best for everyone. Sandra's parents and I have been discussing your situation for months. You're not getting any younger. Dad, you almost fainted at work last month. Mom, you forgot to turn off the stove twice this year. You need supervision. You need care. Care. They were using our age against us. Yes, Frank had gotten dizzy once. He'd skipped breakfast and worked in the heat. Yes, I'd forgotten the stove. I'd been distracted because my son hadn't called in 3 weeks, and I was worried sick. You planned this." I heard my voice, but it sounded far away. "That's why you asked for the money. That's why you cut us off when we said no. You wanted to make sure we had no choice." Sandra smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "Dorothy, you're being dramatic. We're helping you. That apartment at Riverside is lovely. You'll make friends. You'll have activities. And we'll visit sometimes. Sometimes. Not every week. Not every month. Sometimes." "And where will you be?" I asked. "Where are you moving with our money?" Michael pulled out his phone and showed me photos. A massive house, 5 bedrooms, pool, 3-car garage, Maple Ridge. We got the house we showed you before. Sandra's parents are moving in with us. There's a room for Emma, a room for the new baby, a home office for me, a craft room for Sandra. It's perfect. He was glowing. Proud. He'd just destroyed his parents' lives, and he was proud. "You're taking our home," Frank said slowly. "You're taking the house I built my life in, where I raised you, where your mother and I thought we'd grow old together. And you're buying a mansion." Richard stood up, all 6'3" of him. "Frank, let's be honest. You're a construction worker with a high school education. Dorothy was a secretary. You did the best you could, but you failed to plan properly for retirement. Michael has an MBA. He knows what he's doing. This is a smart financial decision for the whole family." The whole family. But Frank and I weren't included in that definition anymore. We were the old generation that needed to be managed, moved, and ultimately forgotten. "Get out." Frank's voice was low and dangerous. "All of you. Get out of my house." Sandra's sister rolled her eyes. "Actually, Frank, it's not your house anymore. The sale is final. You have 30 days to pack and move to Riverside. We've already paid your first 3 months' rent there." They'd paid our rent. With our money. From our house. "No," I said. The word came out stronger than I felt. "No, this isn't legal. You can't just sell someone's house without their permission." Michael pulled out a folder. "Actually, Mom, we can. You signed power of attorney. I have legal authority to make financial and housing decisions on your behalf. My lawyer says everything is completely legitimate. You're both over 65, showing signs of cognitive decline, and the sale was conducted in your best interest." Cognitive decline. They'd built a case against us. Every forgotten phone call, every missed date, every small mistake we'd made. They'd documented it, used it, weaponized it against us. I looked at all of them. Michael, Sandra, her parents, her sister. They were united. A wall of people who'd planned this for months while we'd been heartbroken over losing our son. Frank's next words cut through the noise. "You're not my son anymore." Michael's face flickered. Just for a second, I saw hurt there. But Sandra put her hand on his arm and his expression hardened again. "Dad, you're upset. You'll understand once you've settled into Riverside. You'll see this was the right choice." I still can't believe what happened in that moment. Even now, months later, when I close my eyes, I see my husband's face. But I need to pause here for just a second. Are you feeling what I felt? Tell me in the comments what you would do if your own child did this to you. Because what came next, nobody could have prepared me for it. Frank moved toward the balcony. I thought he was going to go outside, but instead he grabbed something from the closet next to the sliding door. It was his old baseball bat, the one he'd had since high school. For a terrible moment, I thought he might use it. But instead, he just held it against his chest like a shield. "You have 5 minutes to get out. All of you, or I'm calling the police." Richard laughed. "And tell them what? That your son legally sold your house? They'll take one look at those power of attorney documents and side with us." But something in Frank's eyes must have convinced them, because Sandra started gathering her things. "Fine, we're leaving. But Frank, Dorothy, you need to face reality. We'll be back next week with the moving company we've hired. Your new apartment is already furnished, so you'll only need personal items and clothing. Everything else is being sold or donated." Sold or donated. 43 years of memories. The couch where we'd watched Michael take his first steps. The table where we'd had thousands of family dinners. The bed where Frank and I had held each other through good times and bad. All of it, sold or donated. They filed out one by one. Sandra's parents looked pleased with themselves. Her sister wouldn't even look at us. Michael stopped at the door one last time. "Mom, Dad, I love you. I'm doing this because I love you." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that love doesn't steal, doesn't lie, doesn't betray. But I couldn't find the words. I just stared at this stranger wearing my son's face. "If you walk out that door," Frank said, "don't come back, ever." Michael hesitated. For 5 full seconds, he hesitated. Then Sandra called from outside. "Michael, come on." And he left. The door closed behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Frank dropped the bat. It clattered on the hardwood floor he'd refinished himself 15 years ago. He stood there, swaying slightly. And then his knees buckled. I caught him before he hit the ground. But barely. We sank down together, right there in the entryway. My husband, the strongest man I'd ever known, sobbed in my arms like a child. "Dorothy," he gasped between tears. "What do we do? Where do we go? How did this happen?" I had no answers. I just held him and cried with him. We stayed there on the floor for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, Frank pulled away and looked at me. His eyes were hollow. "I built this house," he said. "I literally built it. Me and 3 guys from my crew. Every nail, every board, every window. I built it for us, for our family." He looked around like he was seeing it for the first time, or the last time. And he took it from us like it meant nothing. The betrayal in his voice was worse than the anger. It was the sound of a man whose entire world had collapsed. I helped Frank to his feet. We went to the kitchen, our kitchen, and I made coffee with shaking hands. We sat at the table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 43 years. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Frank said, "The dizzy spell, last month. It was nothing." I told him it was nothing, but he wrote it down like it was evidence. I nodded. "And the stove. I forgot to turn it off because I was worried sick about Emma, about not seeing our granddaughter. I was distracted by grief. We'd been used. Our own natural human moments had been turned into proof that we were incompetent. We have to fight this," I said. But even as I said it, I knew how hard it would be. We'd signed those papers. Michael had legal authority. And Sandra's father had money for lawyers. Real lawyers who would bury us in paperwork and fees until we couldn't afford to fight anymore. Frank shook his head slowly. "What's the point, Dorothy? Even if we win, we've lost our son. We've lost our grandchildren. We've lost our family." He was right. But I couldn't accept it. Not yet. That night, we didn't sleep. We sat up going through every document we could find, every paper Michael had ever given us. And that's when I found it. Tucked in the folder with the power of attorney forms was another document. A quitclaim deed, dated and signed by both of us. Only I didn't remember signing it. The signature looked like mine, but something about it was off. The loop in the D of Dorothy was wrong. I always made it bigger. "Frank," I said, "look at this." He studied it under the lamp. Then he got his reading glasses and looked closer. "That's not your signature," he said finally. "The D is wrong. And look, my signature. The F is too small. I never write it that small." Forgery. They'd forged our signatures on at least one document, maybe more, which meant the whole sale might be illegal, which meant we had a chance. I grabbed my phone to call a lawyer, but Frank stopped me. "Wait," he said. "If we call now, they'll know we found it. They'll have time to cover their tracks. We need to be smart about this." He was right. We needed a plan. We needed evidence. We needed to be as calculating as they'd been. I thought about Michael toasting with Sandra's family while his father cried alone. I thought about the yellow stickers on our furniture. I thought about the word "sometimes" when Sandra mentioned visiting us. "Frank," I said slowly, "what if we let them think they've won?" He looked at me confused. "What do you mean?" I felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. It was a feeling I'd never had before. Pure, focused resolve. What if we move to that apartment? What if we pack up and go quietly? And then we come back with lawyers and evidence and destroy every single plan they've made. Frank's eyes widened. Then slowly, he smiled. It was a terrible smile. A smile I'd never seen on his gentle face before. "Let them celebrate," he said. "Let them move into their mansion with our money. And then we take everything." We spent the rest of the night planning. First thing in the morning, we'd find a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse. We'd document everything. The forged signatures, the coercion, the timeline of events. We'd get statements from the neighbors who'd seen us maintaining the house perfectly well. We'd get medical records proving Frank's dizzy spell was nothing serious. We'd build a case so strong that Michael and Sandra wouldn't know what hit them. But more than that, we'd take back our dignity, our home, our life. They thought we were old and weak and helpless. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. The sun rose on Frank's birthday. He was 65 years old, and he'd spent the night of his birthday being betrayed by his only son. But as we sat there at our kitchen table, watching the light come through the windows, something had changed between us. We weren't victims anymore. We were survivors, and we were going to fight. "Dorothy," Frank said, taking my hand, "promise me something." I squeezed his fingers. "Anything." He looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen in years. "Promise me that no matter what happens, we don't let them break us. We don't let them turn us into the helpless old people they think we are." "I promise," I said. And I meant it. Because Michael had made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated his parents. He'd assumed that because we were older, we were weak. That because we'd always been kind, we'd always be pushovers. But kindness isn't weakness. And age isn't helplessness. We'd lived 72 and 65 years respectively. We'd survived recessions, health scares, the death of our parents, and countless other hardships. We'd raised a child, built a home, created a life. We were not going to let that life be stolen from us without a fight. At 8 in the morning, I called every lawyer in the phone book until I found one who would see us that day. Margaret Chen. She specialized in elder law and abuse cases. We drove to her office with our folder of documents. When we showed her everything, the forged signatures, the timeline, the power of attorney papers we'd been tricked into signing, her face grew serious. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she said, "this is fraud, clear, prosecutable fraud, and elder financial abuse. I can help you, but I need to know. How far are you willing to take this?" Frank and I looked at each other. We'd spent the whole drive discussing this question, and we'd come to the same conclusion. "As far as it needs to go," Frank said, "even if it means our son goes to jail." Margaret nodded slowly. "This won't be easy. They have money. They have Sandra's father's resources. But you have the law on your side, and you have me." She smiled. "I've been doing this for 20 years, and I hate people who prey on their own parents. Let's destroy them." Over the next week, we played our part perfectly. We packed up our belongings. We smiled sadly when the movers came. We let Michael and Sandra think we'd accepted our fate. They came by once, just once, to check on us. Sandra brought a casserole like we were the charity case of the week. Michael couldn't look Frank in the eye. "How are you guys holding up?" he asked. Frank smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We're managing, son. Thank you for your concern." The look on Michael's face, relief mixed with guilt, told me everything I needed to know. He wanted us to accept this so he could stop feeling bad about it. But while they were celebrating, we were building our case. Margaret subpoenaed documents. She got handwriting experts to confirm the forgeries. She gathered medical records proving we were competent. She interviewed neighbors who'd known us for decades. And then, on day 29, one day before we were supposed to move out, she filed a lawsuit. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, undue influence. She filed for an emergency injunction stopping the sale and freezing all assets related to it. Michael and Sandra were served papers that evening while they were having a celebration dinner at their new mansion. Our mansion, bought with our money. The phone started ringing at 11 p.m. Michael, 20 missed calls. Then Sandra. Then her father. I didn't answer. Let them panic. Let them feel what we felt. Because tomorrow, everything was going to change. And this time, we were the ones with the power. The morning of the court hearing, I woke up at 5 a.m. Frank was already awake, sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at his hands. "I built this house with these hands," he said quietly. "Every wall, every door frame. I poured my life into these walls. And today, we find out if we get to keep it." I sat beside him and took those calloused, strong hands in mine. "We're going to win, Frank. We have the truth on our side." He looked at me with eyes that had aged a decade in the past month. "I don't care about winning anymore, Dorothy. I just want our son back. Even after everything, I just want my boy back." We arrived at the courthouse at 8:30. Margaret met us at the entrance, looking sharp in her navy suit and carrying 2 thick briefcases. "They're already inside," she said. "Michael, Sandra, her parents, and their lawyer. He's good, but we're better. Remember, let me do the talking unless the judge asks you a direct question. Stay calm, stay focused, and trust the process. I nodded, but my stomach was in knots. This wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about justice, about proving that age doesn't make you disposable, about showing Michael that his parents were not the weak, confused old people he'd convinced himself we were. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the smell of old paper and floor polish. Michael sat at the defendant's table with Sandra pressed against his side. She looked scared. Good. She should be scared. Richard and Patricia sat behind them, Richard's face red with anger, Patricia nervously twisting her pearl necklace. When Michael saw us walk in, his face went white. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw my little boy again. The one who'd skinned his knee at age 6 and ran crying into my arms. But then Sandra whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened. He looked away. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She reviewed the documents for 10 minutes in silence while we all sat there, barely breathing. Then she looked up. "This is one of the most disturbing cases I've seen in my 20 years on the bench," she said. "Ms. Chen, present your case." Margaret stood, and for the next hour, she systematically destroyed Michael and Sandra's defense. She showed the forged signatures. She presented medical records proving we were competent. She brought in neighbors who testified about our mental sharpness. She showed financial documents proving Michael had manipulated our trust. The handwriting expert was devastating. She projected the forged quitclaim deed on a screen, then our real signatures from other documents. "You can see here, here, and here," she said, pointing with a laser, "that the formation of the letters is completely different. The pressure applied to the pen is different. The spacing is different. These signatures were not written by Dorothy and Frank Thompson. They were traced and altered by someone else." Michael squirmed in his seat. Sandra stared at the table. Margaret then called Dr. Harrison, our family doctor of 20 years. "Mr. Thompson had one episode of dizziness," he testified. "It was caused by dehydration and low blood sugar. He'd skipped breakfast. I found no evidence of cognitive decline, no evidence of any serious medical condition. He's as healthy as most men 20 years younger." Then came our neighbor, Helen Rodriguez. She'd lived 3 houses down for 18 years. "Dorothy and Frank are 2 of the sharpest, most capable people I know," she said firmly. "Dorothy volunteers at the library, runs the book club, remembers every child's name and reading level. Frank does his own home repairs, helps neighbors with projects, maintains his yard perfectly. The idea that they're incompetent is absurd. I've watched them for years. There's nothing wrong with their minds." One by one, Margaret's witnesses painted a picture of 2 capable, independent seniors who'd been manipulated and betrayed by their own son. When it was Michael's lawyer's turn, he tried to spin it. "Your Honor, my clients acted in good faith. They genuinely believed Mr. and Mrs. Thompson needed assistance. The power of attorney was signed voluntarily. The sale was conducted legally through proper channels. This is simply a family disagreement, not a criminal matter." But Judge Morrison cut him off. "Counselor, I've reviewed the evidence. Those signatures were forged. That constitutes fraud, not a family disagreement. And the timeline shows a pattern of isolation and manipulation that's textbook elder abuse. Do you have any witnesses who can refute the evidence Ms. Chen has presented?" The lawyer called Sandra to the stand. She was visibly pregnant, probably thinking it would earn sympathy. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as she spoke. "Your Honor, we were trying to help. My father-in-law got dizzy at work. My mother-in-law forgot things. We were scared for them. We found them a beautiful apartment with medical staff on site. We thought we were doing the right thing." Margaret stood for cross-examination. "Ms. Davis, isn't it true that your parents are moving into the house purchased with the Thompsons' money?" Sandra hesitated. "Yes, and isn't it true that you asked the Thompsons for $80,000 just months before this sale? We needed help with—" "Yes or no, Ms. Davis?" "Yes. And when they refused, you and your husband stopped all contact with them. Isn't that correct?" Sandra's face flushed. "We were hurt that they wouldn't help family." Margaret's voice grew sharper. So you were hurt that two people on fixed incomes wouldn't give you their entire savings, and your solution was to trick them into signing power of attorney documents, forge their signatures on a quitclaim deed, and steal their house. Is that an accurate summary? Sandra started crying. We didn't steal anything. Michael had legal authority. But her tears looked fake now, calculated. The judge was watching her with an expression of barely concealed disgust. Then Margaret called me to the stand. My legs shook as I walked up there, but I kept my back straight. Margaret asked me to describe our relationship with Michael before Sandra. I told stories about Sunday dinners, about helping with homework, about celebrating his college graduation. My voice cracked when I talked about how proud we'd been. Then she asked me to describe what happened after the wedding. I explained the slow isolation, the missed calls, the increasing demands. And when you signed the power of attorney documents, did you understand what you were signing? Margaret asked. No, I said firmly. Michael told us they were health directive forms, just-in-case papers. We trusted our son. Margaret showed me the quitclaim deed with my forged signature. Is this your signature, Mrs. Thompson? I studied it carefully. No, the D is wrong. I've signed my name thousands of times over 72 years. I know how I write. This isn't mine. She nodded. One more question, Mrs. Thompson. If your son is watching this testimony right now, what would you say to him? I looked directly at Michael. He was crying silently, tears running down his face. I'd tell him that we loved him enough to sacrifice everything for his future, and we expected better than to have him sacrifice us for his present. Michael's lawyer tried to make me look confused on cross-examination, but I didn't give him an inch. Mrs. Thompson, isn't it possible you simply don't remember signing these documents? No, sir, it's not possible. I may be 72, but I can tell you every book I've read in the library program this year, every child's name, and every detail of the day my son stole my house. Age doesn't equal amnesia, but you forgot to turn off your stove twice, because I was heartbroken that my son had abandoned me. Grief affects memory, counselor. That's not the same as dementia. He backed off quickly. I could see the judge was on our side. Then Frank took the stand. Margaret asked him to describe building the house. His voice was strong as he talked about every nail, every board, every decision made with love for his family. I built that house for my son, he said, so he'd have a stable home growing up, so he'd understand what it means to create something with your own hands. And when he was 5 years old, I let him hammer in one nail on the front porch. He was so proud. I took a picture of him with his little hammer, grinning from ear to ear. Frank pulled out an old photograph from his pocket. I still carry this picture. That's the son I knew, not the man who stole from me. The courtroom was silent. Even Michael's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Then Frank said something that broke my heart. Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I don't want my son in jail. I just want my house back. I want my life back. And I want Michael to understand what he did. If he can look me in the eye and honestly say he doesn't regret it, then I'll know I lost my son forever. But if there's any part of him that remembers being that 5-year-old boy with the hammer, I want him to make this right. Michael was openly sobbing now. Sandra tried to take his hand, but he pulled away from her. Judge Morrison called a 15-minute recess. We stood in the hallway, Frank and I holding hands, neither of us speaking. Margaret said, "That was powerful testimony. Both of you. I think we're going to win this." But I wasn't thinking about winning anymore. I was thinking about the look on Michael's face when Frank mentioned that photograph. Inside the courtroom, I could hear raised voices. Michael and Sandra were arguing. Richard's voice boomed. "You need to fight this. We've already invested in that house." But Michael's response was quieter, harder to hear. I caught only fragments. What we did to them. And can't live with this. When we returned to the courtroom, something had changed. Michael was sitting apart from Sandra now, his face in his hands. His lawyer looked frustrated. Judge Morrison returned and settled behind her bench. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today. This is my ruling. The sale of the Thompson property is declared null and void due to fraud and forgery. The property is hereby returned to Frank and Dorothy Thompson with immediate effect. All funds from the fraudulent sale are to be returned within 30 days. Michael Davis is ordered to pay restitution, including all legal fees and damages. She paused. Furthermore, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. The courtroom erupted. Sandra burst into tears. Richard shouted, "This is insane! We've already moved into that house!" Patricia sat frozen, her face pale. Margaret squeezed my hand. "You won," she whispered. "You won everything." But I wasn't looking at the judge or at Margaret. I was looking at Michael. He stood up slowly, like an old man, and turned to face us. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across that courtroom. Then he mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." It wasn't enough. It couldn't erase what he'd done. But it was something. Judge Morrison wasn't finished. "Mr. Davis, you have betrayed the 2 people who gave you life. You've committed fraud against your own parents. The only reason I'm not holding you in contempt right now is that your father asked for mercy." She looked at Michael with such disappointment that even I felt it. "You are a disgrace to your family. I'm ordering you to attend mandatory counseling. I'm putting a restraining order in place for 6 months. You cannot contact your parents unless they initiate it. And if I ever see you in my courtroom again, I will show no mercy. Do you understand?" Michael nodded, unable to speak. As we walked out of the courtroom, reporters were waiting. News of the case had spread. Elderly couple fights back against son who stole their home. It was sensational. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in our faces. Margaret handled it perfectly. Frank and Dorothy Thompson are examples of strength in the face of elder abuse. Today, justice prevailed. Let this be a message that our seniors are not helpless, not disposable, and not without recourse. Frank and I said nothing. We just held hands and walked through the crowd to our car, that we'd drive back to our house. Our house. That was ours again. The drive home was surreal. Everything looked the same but felt different. We'd left that morning as potential victims. We were returning as victors. When we pulled into our driveway, I saw that the sold sign was already gone. Margaret had arranged it. The yellow stickers were still on some furniture, but we'd removed those. We walked inside together, and the house welcomed us back. Frank went straight to the balcony, the same balcony where I'd found him crying on his birthday. He stood there for a long time, just looking out at the yard he'd maintained for 43 years. I came and stood beside him. "We did it," I said softly. He nodded but didn't speak. Finally, he said, "I meant what I said in there, Dorothy. I don't want revenge. I'm not happy I won. I'm just broken that it had to come to this." I understood. There was no joy in this victory. We'd gotten our house back, but we'd lost our son in the process. "Do you think he'll ever really understand what he did?" Frank asked. I thought about Michael's face in the courtroom, about those 2 words he'd mouthed. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe one day when he's older and his own children are grown, he'll understand what it feels like to be betrayed by someone you die for." The next weeks were strange. We moved back into our normal routine, but everything felt different. Neighbors came by with casseroles and congratulations. The story had made regional news. Elderly couple defeats son's theft scheme. We received letters from people all over the state sharing similar stories. One woman wrote, "My daughter did the same thing to me. I didn't fight back. I wish I'd had your courage." Another, "Thank you for showing us that age doesn't mean powerless." Frank and I read each letter together, and slowly, we realized our story had become bigger than us. We'd become symbols of something important. Sandra's parents moved out of the Maple Ridge house within 2 weeks. They'd put it back on the market immediately, taking a loss just to escape the situation. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Richard was furious with Michael, blaming him for the whole mess. Sandra's mother stopped speaking to her own daughter for involving them in criminal activity. The family that had once been so united against us was now fractured and broken. I should have felt satisfaction, but I just felt sad. Sad that greed had destroyed so many relationships. Sad that Michael had chosen money over family. Sad that we'd all lost so much. 6 months passed. The restraining order was still in effect, but it was set to expire in 3 weeks. Frank and I had settled back into our life, but there was a hole in it shaped like our son and grandchildren. We'd missed Emma's 3rd birthday. We'd never met the new baby, a boy named Thomas. We saw photos on Sandra's Facebook page before she blocked us. Michael looked tired in every picture, older, like the weight of what he'd done was crushing him. One evening, as Frank and I sat on our balcony watching the sunset, I asked him, "If Michael showed up at our door tomorrow and apologized, would you forgive him?" Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I already forgive him, Dorothy. I forgave him the moment the judge ruled in our favor. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust. It doesn't mean going back to how things were. He broke something that can't be fixed with words." I nodded. But if he really, truly wanted to make amends, if he spent years proving he'd changed, could there be a relationship again? Frank looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I hope so. God help me. I hope so. Because he's still my son, and I still love him. I just don't like him very much right now." 3 weeks later, the restraining order expired. That very evening, there was a knock on our door. Frank and I looked at each other. We both knew who it was. Frank opened the door, and there stood Michael. He was alone. No Sandra, no in-laws, no lawyers. Just our son, looking thinner and older than I'd ever seen him. He had a manila envelope in his hands. "Dad, Mom," he said. His voice cracked. "I know I don't have the right to be here. I know I destroyed everything. But I need to try to explain." Frank didn't move from the doorway. "Explain what, Michael? Explain how you stole from us? Explain how you forged our signatures? Explain how you celebrated while I cried?" Michael's face crumbled. "Yes, all of it. I need to tell you what happened, how it started, how I let Sandra and her family convince me that you were the problem, how I convinced myself that taking the house was somehow helping you." He looked at me. "Mom, I was so wrong. About everything. And I know sorry isn't enough. It'll never be enough. But I need you to know that every single day for the past 6 months, I've hated myself for what I did. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I can't look at my kids without thinking about how I treated my own parents." Frank and I stood there, weighing everything. 43 years of being a good father against 6 months of betrayal. The little boy with the hammer against the man who'd stolen our house. Finally, I spoke. "Michael, I want to believe you've changed. I want to believe you understand what you did. But you didn't just hurt us financially. You destroyed our trust. You made us feel worthless in our own home. You treated us like we were burdens instead of the people who gave you life." Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it if you'll let me." Frank opened the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. "But this is going to take time, Michael. Years, maybe. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal." Michael stepped inside, and I saw him look around at the house he'd tried to steal. His eyes lingered on the family photos, the furniture he'd tagged for sale, the home he'd grown up in. "I don't expect normal," he said. I just want a chance." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd sat after he'd told us he needed $80,000, the same table where Frank and I had planned our fight back. Michael opened the manila envelope and pulled out papers. "I dissolved the power of attorney. I can never have access to your finances or decisions again. I've put it in writing." He slid the papers across to Frank. "I also sold everything Sandra and I bought with your money. The furniture, the electronics, everything. This is a check for what I got. It's not the full amount, but it's a start." The check was for $60,000, more than I'd expected. "And I left Sandra," he said quietly. 2 months ago, I moved into an apartment. I have the kids on weekends. She wanted me to appeal the court's decision, to keep fighting you, and I couldn't do it anymore." Frank and I exchanged glances. This was real. Michael had lost everything. His marriage, his in-laws' support, his comfortable life, and he was trying to rebuild, starting with us. "What about Emma and Thomas?" I asked. "Do we get to see them?" Michael's face brightened for the first time. "That's why I'm here. That's what's in the rest of the envelope. Visitation agreements. Legal documents giving you grandparent rights. I want them to know you. I want them to have what I threw away." He pulled out photos. This is Thomas. He's 4 months old. He has your eyes, Mom. I took the photo with shaking hands. My grandson. The baby I'd never met. He did have my eyes. That same light blue that all the Hendersons had. Emma was in another photo, bigger now, her hair in pigtails. They ask about you, Michael said. Emma remembers you from before. She asks why Grandma and Grandpa don't come over anymore. I've been telling her that Daddy made a big mistake, but we're trying to fix it. Frank picked up the photo of Emma. I saw his hand tremble. Does she really remember us? She talks about the time Grandpa let her help build a birdhouse. She still has it in her room. We talked for 3 hours that night. Michael explained how Sandra's family had slowly poisoned him against us, how they'd made our age seem like a disability, how they'd convinced him that taking the house was an act of mercy rather than theft. He explained how the guilt had eaten him alive, how he'd finally stood up to Sandra and her parents, how the divorce was ugly but necessary. I'm in therapy, he said, 3 times a week, learning about family systems and manipulation, learning about boundaries, learning how to be the son you deserved all along. When Michael finally left that night, Frank and I sat in silence for a long time. Do you think he means it? I asked. Frank nodded slowly. Yes, I think he does. The question is whether meaning it is enough. I thought about that. What if we give him a chance? Not to go back to how things were, but to build something new, something healthier. Frank took my hand. On our terms, with boundaries, with proof through actions, not just words. I agreed. And if he fails, if he falls back into old patterns, then we walk away, Frank finished. We've proven we can survive without him. We don't need him, but maybe we can want him. 6 more months have passed since that night. It's been slow. Michael comes over every other Sunday for dinner, just him and the kids. He helps Frank with projects around the house. He brings groceries. He calls twice a week just to talk, never asking for anything. Emma knows us now. She calls Frank Papa Frank and crawls into my lap to read books. Thomas is walking now, and he laughs when Frank makes faces at him. It's not perfect. There's still pain, still broken places that may never fully heal. But it's something. Sandra tried to reconcile with Michael once, after the divorce was finalized. She showed up at his apartment with her parents, demanding he think about what's best for the family. Michael told me he looked at them and finally saw what we'd seen all along. People who valued money over relationships, status over love, image over truth. He told them to leave and haven't spoken to them since. Richard and Patricia lost their son-in-law, their connection to their grandchildren, and their reputation in town. The word elder abuse follows them everywhere now. Today is Frank's 66th birthday. We're having a party, just family, Michael and the kids, our neighbor Helen, Margaret, the lawyer who became our friend. It's small and simple and perfect. Frank is on the balcony again, but this time he's not crying. He's laughing, showing Emma how to use his old camera to take pictures of the sunset. Michael is helping me in the kitchen, cutting vegetables for the salad. Mom, he says quietly, thank you for giving me another chance. I know I didn't deserve it. I look at my son, really look at him. He's grayer now, thinner. The easy arrogance he had when Sandra's family surrounded him is gone. In its place is something humbler, something better. We're a family, Michael, I tell him, and family means you don't give up, even when things are hard. But it also means you don't accept abuse in the name of love. We had to fight back to save ourselves, and you had to hit rock bottom to find yourself. Maybe we all needed to break so we could rebuild something stronger. Michael nods, tears in his eyes. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed. I touch his cheek like I used to when he was little. I know you will, son. And we'll be right here, watching you do it. So here I am, 72 years old, telling you this story from the balcony of the house I almost lost. Frank is beside me, Emma is at our feet playing with her toys, and Thomas is napping in the portable crib we bought for when they visit. Michael is cleaning up after dinner, doing dishes without being asked, staying to help instead of running off to the next thing. It's not the family I imagined having all those years ago when I held my newborn son for the first time. But it's the family we fought for, the family we rebuilt from ashes, and the family we chose to forgive without forgetting. That's my story. What do you think? Would you have done the same? Would you have fought back, or would you have accepted defeat? Would you have forgiven, or would you have walked away forever? Leave me a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story touched you, if it made you think about your own family, or gave you courage to stand up for yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe. I have so many more stories like this to share with you. Stories about ordinary people who found extraordinary strength. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, you're never too old to fight for what's yours.